This video is for teachers who are doing day 20 of Unit 3 in the Passport to Social Studies curriculum. The objective of this lesson is to evaluate whether this time period was one of progress or decline for African Americans by considering the perspectives of W.E.B. DuBois and Booker T. Washington. This video will provide an overview of the lesson along with some ideas for engaging the students with the primary sources that they're going to read. When we get to the introduction and model section, which we can see right here, this part contains a brief video from the biography channel and a tertiary text from Frontline. And before beginning either of these, I would go back to this slide, and I'll move this up here, and remind the students that they should really be looking for the similarities and differences between both men's perspectives. Then they are then going to complete this Venn diagram. And like it mentions in the teacher-facing guidance instruction slide, students can complete it either independently, in small groups, or even as a whole class. It really depends on the unique strengths and needs of your students. Also, this serves as the foundation for the rest of the lesson. So this is an ideal moment to also check for understanding and clarify any misconceptions they have before moving forward. The students will then select one text from both men, and they're going to focus on this question. What did their reading say about what each person viewed as progress for African Americans in this time, which they're going to then annotate for as they read both texts. Instead of having the students haphazardly make their selections or only use the titles, you could also present them with this information. Agitation, right here, by W.E.B. DuBois, appeared in The Crisis in 1910, and in it, he defended his philosophy of agitating and disrupting the status quo through a metaphor of bodily pain. The Talented Tenth, which is the second W.E.B. DuBois option, it appeared in a book published in 1903 that was a collection of essays written by prominent African-American voices. And in this excerpt, he talks of the role of the most gifted African-American men as leaders and role models of the African-American community, and the important role that higher education plays in the process. The first option for Booker T. Washington is right here. It's an excerpt from a speech he gave in 1895 entitled The Atlanta Compromise. And in this, he advocates his support for a kind of social and economic agreement between African-American workers and white employers. And in the second option for Booker T. Washington, this is an excerpt from a speech he gave at the Hampton Institute, also in 1895. And in this one, he promotes his belief that African Americans need to continue to work together, again, economically and socially with white people in order to slowly achieve equality. If you do choose to provide your students with these little blurbs about each text, it is important that you balance between providing them with an engaging hook for them, but also not providing the students too much of a summary. On this next slide, here's where we see the discussion prompts. And like it says here, the students can respond to them either in the chat by typing, or if they want to do it verbally by unmuting, that's also an option. If time permits and you deem it beneficial for your students, there are some ideas for enabling the students to collaborate on kind of a deeper dive of these texts. And I'm going to go through some of those options right now. One option would be to arrange the students into small groups of like 3 to 4 and place them in breakout rooms and have them discuss and reach consensus on which 2 of the texts that they want to read. Then instruct them to read each text independently. And after each one, they can participate in a structured discussion, such as a Save the Last Word for Me activity, which requires each student to select a passage from that text that really resonated with them. This activity has been used before in the Passport to Social Studies curriculum, and I think the students might have seen it last in Unit 2. And I'm going to pull it up right here. And this is actually the protocol for it. And it's actually on page 136 in the grade 11 Unit 2 guide. I know that some of the texts are shorter than others, but to really get the students to consider perspective, you may instruct them when they are selecting their quote for this activity to really narrow their selection to something that does have to do with perspective. After each student does find their quote, they are then to take turns sharing it with their group. And after each student shares, they then mute themselves for 60 seconds while their classmates discuss it. If necessary, you can provide them with sentence starters, such as "This made me think of," or "My interpretation of that quote is." And after the minute is up, the original student then unmutes and offers one last closing statement on the quote, or maybe a reaction to what they heard their classmates discussing. And this is a great learning activity that I've been using frequently during remote instruction because it's low stakes, and it has plenty of opportunities for me to provide support to my students who may still have difficulty engaging with their peers. And also, it also reinforces some of these other skills that are incredibly important in social studies courses, such as like synthesizing and also listening and responding to their classmates. If you think that your students need more practice with or exposure to the language of perspective, you can provide them access to the tool, which I'm going to pull up right here. And after they are done with each of the readings, you can instruct the students to read through the array of aspects that inform perspective, which we can see listed over here on this left column. Then discuss and reach consensus about which one they believe is most relevant to that unique text that they just read. The students can then work together to try to answer the question that is associated with whatever aspect they decide on. And to check for their understanding, you might even instruct them to either type or verbally share one of the discussion sentence starters when the whole class reconvenes. A final activity for synchronous learning would be to pair students up who are reading the same texts. And since they already have an idea of what each man stood for from like the tertiary reading and the video, it might be interesting to have them engage in a prediction activity. However, just speaking from my own experience, the students need to be explicitly told that their predictions must be realistic and grounded in what they already know about each of the men. If this is their first time doing this, a teacher model would also be very useful. Tell the student pairs that before actually reading the text, they should, and I'll pull this up, let's say they were doing it with this one, they should first, read the title, and then think about how they would finish this sentence. Based on what I know about the author, I bet he would say, and after both students share their predictions, they then read the text either independently or collaboratively, then discuss the extent to which their predictions were correct. The process is repeated for the second text they read, and depending on class dynamics, you can also opt to reorganize the pairs in the event that students are not reading the same text as their original partner. For students who are doing this work asynchronously, it would be beneficial for them to still be exposed to the thoughts of their peers and have the ability to react to them. So what you could do is select one or both of these discussion prompts from slide 21, and you could post them to a site like Padlet if you do want to respond them by typing. You could also direct them to comment on a certain number of their peers' responses using that site. Another option would be for you to post the discussion, either one of these discussion prompts, to a site like Flipgrid, which would allow them to reply verbally. And from there, the students then independently construct their response to this wrap-up question, which again is asking them to consider whether this period was one of progress or decline for African Americans.